Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Ryan Warmley, joined as I always am on Fridays by Derek Brown and Matthew Friedman and Andrew Erickson. We got the whole gang here. It's week 2, our Friday show. Anybody who listened last week remembers we're going to be running through some key matchups for every single game on the slate this weekend. Friedman, how are you feeling here 1 week into the season?
I'm doing great. Week 1 was fantastic. Week 2 had an awesome Thursday night football game, so really looking forward to the rest of this slate.
Yeah, we had a really fun, high-octane matchup. It wasn't quite maybe the huge scoring total that we thought, but still, obviously a really fun game. Erickson, what'd you think?
I was glad that Josh Palmer caught a touchdown because someone DM'd me on Twitter and said, "Why'd you hype up Josh Palmer?" And I was like, hey, maybe you should watch the entire game first. So, yeah, Josh Palmer with the touchdown. Victory lap season.
Debro, I know you were tweeting a little about CEH and Mike Williams during the game.
Well, I barely made the show this morning, guys, only because I was trying to send out all of the invites cancel all the invites to the retirement party for Mike Williams. Apparently, he didn't retire, and he's still really good at football, so...
Yeah, who could have possibly guessed that? Let's make sure everybody can find the three of us online. Debro's Twitter handle is at Debro_FFB. Erickson's is at Andrew Erickson _. Friedman is at Matt F. The Oracle. And I am at Ryan Warmley. And of course, you can find all of our work at Fantasy Pros across all the different accounts that you follow. I want to also take a quick moment to tell you guys about My Playbook's Autopilot tool. Autopilot makes it incredibly easy to manage your lineups across all your leagues. It sends emails on suggested lineup changes. It can auto-swap inactive players out for you. You can even turn on full autopilot and have your optimal lineup set automatically each week. Automate your lineup management for all your leagues with Autopilot over at fantasypros.com/myplaybook. You have to be an MVP or Hall of Fame level subscriber to use Autopilot. So if you're not currently a subscriber, we've got an amazing offer that gets you premium for 6 months without paying us a dime. You can check out that deal at fantasypros.com/offers. Guys, another full slate here, so we'll jump right into it. Starting off Sunday early afternoon, as we always do. And starting off, not because I'm a homer, it's because NFL.com listed it this way, with the Dolphins at the Ravens. Erickson, what is your key matchup in this one?
Of course, we're starting with the Ravens matchup, but I'm really looking forward to seeing Tua against this Ravens pass defense. So last week, we saw the Miami Dolphins rank first in terms of team pass play rate over expectation, but Tua still finished outside the top 20 in terms of fantasy scoring at the quarterback position. So I'm actually a little more concerned about this matchup here for the Dolphins quarterback. You're looking at the Ravens, I think they're going to run more zone coverage now that they've moved on from Wink Martindale, who's basically someone that always liked to run a lot of man coverage, and I don't think that's ideal for Tagovailoa. You look at what he did last week against man coverage against the Patriots, 90% completion rate, 14.8 yards per attempt. Versus zone, he was at 65% completion rate, 6.1 yards per attempt. So the Ravens are getting back Marcus Peters after he missed week 1. They already have Marlon Humphrey there as a stud cornerback who got hurt last year. Kyle Fuller is out, being replaced by Darian Williams or Brandon Stevens in the slot, but Miami didn't even really play Waddle or Tyreek Hill that much in the slot last week. None of them had higher than 35% snap share from the slot. So I think that Tua is going to struggle in this matchup against a tough Ravens defense because they're going to run some zone.
Two quick notes just on the secondary injuries. Marcus Peters isn't just coming off of missing week 1. He's coming off of missing an entire season. There might be some rust there. Brandon Stevens, also the guy who's going to replace Fuller, is limited in practice. They're not sure if he's actually going to end up playing this week. So there are some secondary concerns in Baltimore. Friedman, what matchup are you looking at?
All right, I'm looking at the two number 1 wide receivers in this game, Tyreek Hill and Rashod Bateman, because I like the taste of low-hanging fruit. As Ryan mentioned, the Ravens are dealing with some issues in their secondary. No Kyle Fuller. Marcus Peters, we're not sure if he's playing in this game. Probably will, but coming off of the season-ending injury. Tyreek Hill last year going against the Ravens was totally removed from the game plan. Had just 14 yards on 4 targets, but it is a new defensive coordinator. Hill was great last week, 100 yards on 12 targets and a carry. Let's see how he does this week. And then Rashod Bateman, he saved his day with a long touchdown last week, but he had just 5 targets. He has a tough matchup going against Xavier Howard, who will probably shadow him. I think he has the talent to be a true number 1 wide receiver, but I would like to see it in this game.
It's also a different coaching staff in Miami. And Friedman, I just wanted to ask you, schematically, we don't need to get into too deep into the weeds of the X's and O's, but last season, the Dolphins absolutely embarrassed the Ravens on national television when they just blitzed them the entire game. They basically played Engage 8 from Madden over and over and over again the entire game, and Lamar Jackson, the Ravens, had no answer. Do you think we're going to see a different approach by the Ravens that will allow for more fantasy scoring?
I think it's something similar because even though head coach Brian Flores is gone, they still have the same defensive coordinator there. So they wanted to have that continuity, and I think they probably use a similar game plan given the success they had last year against Tyreek.
Debro, what matchups are you interested in?
I mean, the first one off the top is Lamar. I think that this is a quiet smash spot for him to just crush Miami. You look at what Lamar does well, lots of play action, lots of deep passing. I mean, right now he's third in deep attempts. He's sixth in play action rate. Those things have been a staple of Baltimore's offense. And Miami, while they've been good over the last 2 years as far as pass defense, top 10 in DVOA, they allowed the 8th highest deep completion rate and the 8th most passing touchdowns on play action last year. So I think it's a quiet ceiling spot for Lamar. And on the other side of the ball, like Chase Edmonds, his breakaway run rate is fantastic. And the one thing that the Ravens struggle against is explosive runners. You look at their run defense of the last few years, I mean, 7th in yards after contact per attempt. They had the 10th highest percentage of runs that went for 10 or more yards last year. And Edmonds proved he was the passing down back in week 1. Oh, sorry, Baltimore, but you were 30th in DVOA last year against receiving backs. This really could be a Lamar Jackson and Chase Edmonds showdown for week 1 or week 2.
Game number 2 of week number 2 is Jets at Browns. Debro, sticking with you. What's your key matchup here?
So if the Browns are going to pull off the win here, which I think they can, it's going to be on the back of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt versus this New York Jets run defense, because their secondary, I think, is going to prove itself to be extremely good. And after 1 week of shutting down Kenyon Drake and whatever dust balls were back there last week, I'm not ready to proclaim the Jets run defense to be good. They gave up the 4th most rushing yards, 9th highest yards per attempt last year. I think that if the Browns pull off the win, it means that Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt had big days on the ground.
Freeman, what matchup are you looking at?
I'm looking at Michael Carter and David Njoku. Carter was the lead back in a committee last week. He had 100 yards on 10 carries and 9 targets in a game that, the Ravens dominated 24-9, and yet somehow he still had that kind of production. So I'm kind of impressed with what he did. Now he's going against the Browns defense that was number 28 last year in rush EPA per play. Let's see if he's able to keep the lead in the split between, himself and Breece Hall. And then David Njoku last week, 71 snaps, 30 routes, and just 1 target. And by the way, 1 target from a quarterback who should not be throwing the ball any farther down the field than 5 yards. Like, how is that possible? I want to see Njoku's usage in week 2, because if it's similarly bad, I am all the way out. And then at that point, he's just like someone you easily are dropping in redraft leagues.
Yeah, very inauspicious start for a tight end that a lot of people liked as a sleeper coming into the season, at least based off the contract. Erickson, where are you looking in this one?
I'm looking at the Browns wide receiver 1, at least if you look at compensation, Amari Cooper. Is he going to get targets in this game? He got out-targeted last week by Donovan Peoples-Jones, 11-6. 3 grabs for just 17 yards with Jacoby Brissett under center. Like, is this just going to be it with Amari Cooper? He's just going to turn into dust in Cleveland here? And I don't think it's a good matchup for him against rookie Sauce Gardner. Gardner was really good in his opening debut, just 1 catch for 8 yards on 35 coverage snaps in week 1, 42.4 passer rating allowed. I'm drinking the sauce, man, and I'm just staying far away from Amari Cooper as possible.
Let's move to game 3. Patriots at Steelers. Friedman, what's the key matchup here?
I'm looking at the Steelers' run defense against the Patriots' run offense. Last year, the Patriots had one of the best rushing offenses in the league, by a variety of advanced efficiency metrics. They were in the top 10. The Steelers had a mediocre at best run defense. But last week, we kind of saw that flipped. Against a rebuilt Bengals offensive line. The Steelers' defensive front 7 looked pretty good. They held running back Joe Mixon to just 3 yards per carry on 27 attempts. And, like the Bengals, the Patriots significantly reconstituted their offensive line this offseason. They lost their guards, Shaq Mason and Ted Karras. They switched their offensive tackles in terms of the sides that they were playing. Michael Nwenu, who was their top offensive line backup, he's now in the starting offensive line. And then they have a new left guard that they drafted. So it's a significantly reconstituted offensive line. So a lot of changes there. And on top of that, there's the change in scheme in that they've transitioned away from the gap-heavy power rushing attack towards more of a Shanahan-style zone blocking scheme, and the results were bad last week. Their running backs had just 71 yards on 19 carries. Now, for the Steelers, TJ Watt, Defensive Player of the Year, he's out, and his presence or his lack of presence will certainly be felt. At Betting Pros, we're projecting him as, worth 1.5 points against the spread. He's one of the few defensive players who actually can change a game. But the Patriots offense is based on the running game, and Watt's value is primarily as a pass rusher, not as a run defender. And in the interior of that defensive line, the Steelers still have the guys. They have Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, Chris Wormley. Those guys, I think, are sufficient enough to challenge the Patriots running game. And if that happens, then the entire Patriots offense could underwhelm again for a second straight week.
Shouts to my cousin, Chris Wormley. Let's follow up with Erickson. What's your matchup here?
I'm looking here at the slot here for the Patriots and the Steelers. So Chase Claypool has taken over this big slot role for the Steelers. He had 6 carries and 6 targets last week. The efficiency was gross. He just 18 receiving yards. But the fact that coaches are willing to feed Claypool in the slot, I think forecasts like some fantasy production coming his way. You look at his matchup against Miles Bryant. So Claypool is 6'4", 238 pounds, can run a 4.42. He's going up against Miles Bryant, who is 5'9", 185 pounds, 4.62 40-yard dash speed. Woof. I think Claypool's going to be in Bryant's nightmares Sunday night.
Debra, how about you?
I think it's going to come down to Pat Freiermuth excelling versus his defense and Najee Harris. If the Steelers are going to be able to move the ball and stuff outside of maybe we see a lot of big slotsism from Claypool, Freiermuth has a tough matchup, and he got a ton of targets in week 1, but we're also talking about a Patriots defense that's been top 12 in DVOA in each of the last 3 seasons. They are no pushover or slouch there, and they gave up the lowest reception total and receiving yards in the NFL to tight ends. So I think it's a long day for Pat Freiermuth. We're going to see if he excels. Proved last week that he was one of the pillars of this passing attack. And Najee Harris, regardless of whatever our feelings are about the foot, the Patriots' run defense looked terrible last year. They might be all the way back this year, considering after 1 week, they're top 5 in every adjusted line yard metric that I care about. And, newsflash, Steelers' offensive line is still terrible, 25th or worse in every line yard metric. And that's not really much of a change from last year. So I think it's going to be pivotal for the Steelers to get Najee Harris going and see if they can get production out of Freiermuth.
Debra, really quickly, we've mentioned some stats from last season already a few times in this show. How much do you weigh what we saw in 2021 versus what we've already seen this year in just week 1?
I think you try to marry the two together, look and see where the changes have been, as well as, if we're seeing some teams struggle versus the same things or excel, a lot of times I'll also look at personnel changes. So did the team reconstitute a lot of their players during the offseason? Have there been changes? Have there not? And so at least through 1 week of football, you're trying to get clarity through all of that.
Let's get into our next game and also our first pick in the over-under challenge. The over-under game is sponsored by No House Advantage, who are giving away $10,000 in weekly and season-long prizes, including a grand prize of $3,000. Check them out today at nohouseadvantage.com or download the app on the app stores. Use promo code PROS at sign-up for a first deposit match up to $50. Our first over-under challenge this week is none other than the GOAT, Tom Brady. Will he go over or under 18.5 fantasy points against the Saints? Erickson.
I'm going under for Tom Brady and his fantasy point total.
Not the GOAT this week for Erickson. Friedman, how about you?
Yeah, also taking under. The Bucs were run heavy last week. His wide receivers are injured, and Mike Evans has a tough matchup, which I will touch on a little bit later. Ooh, look at that. The natural tease.
Man, you should be hosting this show, Friedman.
Professional transition.
Debra, how about you?
Sweet.
I'm going to tell you how I'll go with the chalk. I'll go with the under. And a lot of that comes down to the injuries for the Bucs receivers right now.
The guys will share some of their other favorite over-unders from this week's challenge throughout the show. But for now, let's turn to Erickson for his key matchup in Saints-Buccaneers.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Saints defensive line versus the Bucs offensive line, and the Bucs offensive line's banged up. So to tackle Donovan Smith is dealing with an injury. There is already no Ryan Jensen, and they gave up a pretty high pressure rate last week to Dallas, 31%. Tom Brady last year was the least pressure quarterback in the NFL at 21%. And I was trying to figure out, so the Saints front, it basically got no pressure on Marcus Mariota in week 1, just pressure on 11% of his dropbacks. So does this mean the Saints have lost a step? And I don't think that at all. I really think it's because of the mobility that Marcus Mariota offers is very different than what Tom Brady has, obviously, as a more statuesque quarterback. And if you think back to some of the times the Saints defense has been beaten, I know Friedman was very high on Jalen Hurts as a rookie. They struggle against mobile quarterbacks. Tom Brady is not a mobile quarterback. And the other thing is he doesn't use play action. Marcus Mariota, highest play action rate in week 1. Tom Brady, second fewest play action rate last year and in week 1. So I think that the Saints defensive line is going to get pressure on Tom Brady in this Bucs offensive line that is banged up. You mentioned all the other injuries they're dealing with and the fact that they also are establishing the run. Nothing like we've ever really seen before in terms of ranking in the negative, in terms of pass play rate over expectation. I think Brady's going to have not a very productive game. And if they're going to come out with a win, I think it's going to be because they're giving the ball to Leonard Fournette and taking advantage of our Saints run defense that looked exploitable at times against the Falcons in week 1.
Friedman, for some reason, I just have this gut feeling you want to talk about Mike Evans.
Yeah, you're very intuitive that way. Yeah, for sure. Mike Evans and also Julio Jones. Evans is dealing with a calf injury, which is nice. He's already got a built-in excuse in case Saints cornerback Marshawn Lattimore just shuts him down. Evans was limited in practice Wednesday, DNP on Thursday, which is not the trajectory you want to see. We need to see the injury report for Friday. I'm assuming he plays. If that happens, he will be blanketed in the shadow coverage of Marshawn Lattimore. And with Chris Godwin out, I think that means the ball ends up going to Julio Jones. Now, Jones, he's been out for 2 straight practices because of some knee soreness. I don't really care. He misses practice all the time. Save those reps for the game, big fella. He was explosive last week. He had a really nice 69 yards on 5 targets. They even gave him 2 carries to Julio Jones, and he turned that into 17 yards. Saints number 2 cornerback, Paulson Adebo, missed week 1 with an ankle injury, yet to practice this week. So Julio could be going against a backup with a lot of targets coming his way. I am all here for the Julio Renaissance.
Yeah, he's on the TB12 method if he's getting carries at this age and with his injury history. D-Bro, what are you looking at?
I'm looking for a way for these wide receivers from New Orleans to succeed against Tampa Bay, and it's going to be tough, guys. The one spot, because you have Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis on the outside, we know they're stellar, all pros, they're awesome. The one spot that every offense has always been able to exploit versus the Bucs is Sean Murphy-Bunting in the slot. Todd Bowles said, nope, not anymore, man. They got Antoine Winfield covering the slot now. 62% catch rate, 43 passer rating in week 1. He is stellar in slot coverage. So I was going through the matchup of the primer, and I'm like, okay, how does Winston succeed here? I don't think he does. Not unless these wide receivers can get over on the corners, and it's not looking great.
Game 5, Colts at Jags. Sticking with you, D-Bro.
Christian Kirk, baby. We're going to see him excel in another game. Kenny Moore. I'm sorry. I'm just not a fan of Kenny Moore. Kenny Moore wants money. Kenny Moore does not deserve money, not considering how well he's playing or lack thereof. Christian Kirk is going to eat his lunch in the slot this week. Kenny Moore, week 1, 71% catch rate, 138 pass rating, and a touchdown allowed. Christian Kirk's getting in the end zone this week.
Christian Kirk obviously had a really good week 1. Do you think that if he has another really good week this week, he might be a sell high candidate, or are you buying in for the whole year?
Oh, no. You need to be buying him now. You need to be buying him afterward. You need to be trading for him in every single iteration and format that you're playing. I think he's going to crush this year.
Erickson, what's your matchup in this one?
Looking at the Jags run game against this Colts defense, I think that the Colts are starting to become one of these pass funnel defenses. So the Texans running backs average just 2.9 yards per carry against the Colts in week 1. So I think the Jaguars are going to try to throw the ball. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball efficiently, even with James Robinson coming back and looking spry in his return from the Achilles injury. The Colts allowed 10 targets to the running back position in week 1. So I'm looking at Travis Etienne as an advantage that they can take out of a mismatch out of the backfield. He had more targets. He had a higher route participation than James Robinson. He also saw 5 red zone touches to Robinson's 3 in week 1. So I think if Etienne can actually catch the ball with one of these high value touches, I think he's going to be a producer in week 2.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Etienne versus Robinson. You like Etienne a lot better then?
I think that the matchup asks for the pass catcher in this particular matchup. I think they're going to be behind. They're going to have to throw more, and I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball efficiently with either running back.
Friedman, I know you're looking at the running backs as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Jonathan Taylor, some more low-hanging fruit here. Thanks, guys. I'll take that fruit. I'll take that fruit, and I will enjoy it for the rest of the podcast. He's playing the Jags. That's the analysis. Jonathan Taylor against the Jaguars. He had a league-high 31 carries last week, and his 3 career starts against the divisional rival Jags. He has 446 yards rushing, 3 rushing touchdowns. I don't think we can forget that first game he had against the Jags when he was the locked-in starter. It was 250-something yards rushing. I mean, absolutely destroyed them. This is the week that Jonathan Taylor will really make me regret ranking CMC number 1 in our draft rankings instead of him. He's just going to pummel the Jags. It's going to be ugly for the Jags and for the old Friedman over here.
Yeah, that's the podcast equivalent of Jonathan Taylor. That's it. That's the tweet that you always see on Twitter. I'm sure he's going to have one of those epic days. Game 6, Panthers at Giants. Erickson, what's your key matchup?
Looking at Saquon Barkley against the Panthers D. Saquon is back, and I think a lot of it has to do with how they've actually transformed Daniel Jones in this particular offense. Daniel Jones has become a dink and dunk conservative quarterback. He posted just 120 air yards, which was the lowest among all starting quarterbacks in week 1. Bottom 10 average depth of target. On 21 pass attempts from Jones, only 5 were thrown 10 yards down the field. What does that mean? Saquon Barkley, 33% target share in week 1. That's not going away. 83% snap share, 82% opportunity share for Saquon on 24 touches. He's going to have another monster game. The Browns did whatever they wanted against this Panthers defense in week 1, over 180 rushing yards. Barkley is ranked as my RB3 this week, and the Giants offensive line looked impressive. Second in yards before contact created against the Tennessee Titans in week 1. So they're opening holes up for Saquon Barkley. Barkley's hitting the hole. He's looking explosive, and he's back, baby.
Erickson, I asked this question to Friedman on our Sunday night recap show last week. Everybody should make sure to tune into that. 7:45 Eastern every single Sunday night of the season. Is this Saquon-assance more about him being healthy? Is it about having Brian Daboll install a new offense? Is it about just better talent around him? What's the biggest factor here?
I mean, I think the fact that he's healthy makes a lot of sense. We always knew he was super talented, but just these small upgrades across the board, like the offensive line not being 32nd and just being, okay, if it's average, that's going to make a big difference. The fact that he has an adult calling plays and not someone that's a complete clown operating the offense. Those small upticks combined with the fact that he is, from a talent perspective, a top 5 running back, I think that's all kind of factoring into play on why we're seeing this. How did you parse it?
Saquon-assance.
Yeah, I can't say that.
That needs to be a hashtag. That's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I love that.
I appreciate that, D-Bro. And for that kind word, I will go to you for our next matchup.
I know, man. I think this game's going to come down to the Giants wide receivers. They got to get production from these guys somehow, right? So Sterling Shepard needs to step forward. I was surprised how good he looked in week 1. I mean, they had him on 85% of Jones dropbacks, running routes, 21st in route win rate, and he was first in win rate versus man coverage. If there's any semblance of that same talent left inside Shepard's body coming off the Achilles, we really need to see it step forward for the Giants. And then, hey, I think the best matchup on the board for the Giants receivers is their slot wide receiver. And no, that doesn't seem to be Kadarius Toney, unfortunately, who's also dealing with an injury. There we go for ways to get out of not playing Daboll. Richie James, the starting receiver for the Giants in the slot, I think that he has the best matchup on the board. So if you're in a deep league, I think that he's flex worthy, or dynasty formats, pick him up. He's a desperation start, obviously. I'm not going to be ranking him high. But against Jeremy Chin and Hartsfield in the slot, I mean, both these guys gave up over 90 passer ratings last year. So we could see Daniel Jones dink and dunk to Richie James all game.
Friedman, talk to me about my guy, DJ Moore.
Yeah, DJ Moore and Kadarius Toney, because I want to really disgust you with two wide receivers who underwhelmed last week. DJ Moore, super talented, the only wide receiver in each of the past 3 seasons to finish top 10 in receiving yards, but last week was bad, 6 targets, 43 yards. Robbie Anderson outplayed him. He saw a lot of cornerback Denzel Ward, who's one of the better guys in the league, and he's going to face another pretty good cornerback this week in Adoree Jackson, who I think will shadow him. Jackson has allowed just 6.85 yards per target for his career, so another tough matchup. It feels like a downgrade spot for Moore, and that means I'm going under 11.5 points for Moore in the no house advantage contest. And then Kadarius Toney, he played just 7 snaps last week, got 2 targets, 23 yards, 2 carries, no targets, 2 carries, 23 yards. What's going on? Like, he's this year's version of Brandin Aiyuk. He's probably the most talented wide receiver on the roster. Forget the matchup. I just want to know, does he get on the field this week? Like, how much playing time does he even have a chance to get? Because he is getting very close to being droppable in a lot of leagues.
Final game of the early afternoon slate is Commanders at Lions. Erickson, what's the biggest matchup here?
Looking at Carson Wentz commanding this Washington offense against this Lions pass defense that basically could do nothing to try to stop Jalen Hurts a week ago. They generated 1 pressure against an elite Eagles offensive line. Now, I don't think Washington's O-line is as good as Philly's, but the fact that they have the number 1 matchup per PFF's O-line D-line matchup chart means to me Wentz is going to be operating from a clean pocket. He threw for 282 yards from a clean pocket in week 1. He's got weapons to distribute the ball to through McLaurin, Dotson, Samuel, Gibson, McKissick, and they're not afraid to throw the ball. Commanders were 5th highest pass play rate under neutral game script, 4th highest in terms of pass play rate over expectation in week 1. And I don't think there's any reason to think that they're going to go away from the passing game based on how well Carson Wentz looked outside of the interceptions that he threw last week. So I think if you need a streaming quarterback, Carson Wentz is my number 1 guy. I'm pounding the over on his 235.5 passing yards prop, 23.5 point implied team total for Washington. I love Wentz this week.
Man, I know he looked good, but it is just so hard to trust Carson Wentz and Washington in the same, marriage there.
Lions defense, baby.
I'm with you there. Freeman, what are you looking at?
I'm looking at Antonio Gibson and Johan Dotson. Gibson was great in his first 2 years in the league. Last week, without Brian Robinson, he had 130 yards on 14 carries, 8 targets against the Jags. He has a great matchup this week. The Lions defense last year was number 31 in both rush DVOA and pass DVOA against running backs. And last week, they didn't look good against the Philly backs. Miles Sanders scored a touchdown against them. That pretty much says it all. And then Johan Dotson, he saw Curtis Samuel get way more work, but I still liked what we saw out of Johan Dotson in his NFL debut. He lined up all over the formation, an 89% route rate, 88% snap rate, and he scored 2 touchdowns, just 5 targets, 1 carry, but it was encouraging. And if you look at our Betting Pros odds page right now, he is the favorite to be Offensive Rookie of the Year. Great matchup. He could have another really good fantasy week.
D-Bro?
2 guys that I think stick out of this game. I mean, look, when is the sun god, Amon-Ra St. Brown, not going to produce for our fantasy teams? Wide receiver 1 finish in 7 of his last 8 games. He was top 12 in both target share and targets per route rate. I think he has another great game here against Benjamin St-Juste, who's big, physical, and slow in the slot, who's taken over the slot role this year, gave up a 114 passer rating and coverage in his rookie season last year. So another good game incoming for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And if you're needing a deep streamer, Logan Thomas, I was surprised last week, played over 60% of the snaps, had over 60% route participation. Both of those could go up. We saw his yards per route run was fantastic last week, and he had the 5th highest ADOT. So if we're talking about like surprise contributors for Washington this week, he could easily make the list. I mean, Detroit was terrible versus tight ends last year. 29th in DVOA. They had the 5th most reception and 2nd most receiving yards allowed to the position. So Logan Thomas could be a top 10 tight end this week.
Game 8, our first in the late afternoon slate is Falcons at Rams. Friedman, what's the key matchup?
Yeah, I'm going to be super chalky here and say Cooper Kupp. It's a key matchup going against the slot cornerbacks. So let me put some context on this. Last week we saw Kupp Thursday Night Football. He got his shine, 100% snap rate and route rate, 128 yards and a touchdown on 13 receptions, 15 targets against a great Bills defense. But then all of the other top wide receivers crushed it on Sunday. And you started to hear the whispers. Is Cooper Kupp still the number 1 fantasy wide receiver? Yes. In this game, Kupp will emphatically remind people that he is the king until someone takes the triple crown that he won last year, because this matchup could not be better. The Falcons defense is horrible against the pass. Last year, number 29 in pass DVOA. Last week, it was number 30. All right, in our internal Fantasy Pros unit power rankings, we see the Rams pass catchers as having a significant edge over the Falcons secondary, and Kupp specifically has an edge. The Falcons are pretty strong on the perimeter with cornerbacks AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward, but Kupp lines up most in the slot, and that means he's going against cornerbacks D. Alford and Mike Ford. Alford is an undrafted rookie. Okay, good luck with that. And Ford is a journeyman, 9.9 yards per target allowed for his career. Whatever the prop line is for Kupp's yardage in this game, first of all, it better start with a 1. And then second of all, it's too low regardless of wherever the book puts it.
Just to recap for anybody who has some tough decisions this week, Friedman likes Jonathan Taylor and Cooper Kupp this week. So make sure you're paying attention to that. Debro, what's your matchup to watch?
That fruit tastes really good. Again, another talented player we're going to talk about. If the Falcons are going to have success throwing the ball, I think it's with Kyle Pitts. And look, we're talking about Troy Hill in the slot for the Rams, who was god-awful in Cleveland last year. 76% catch rate, 125 passer rating allowed. Just the size matchup for Pitts versus Troy Hill is going to be something that I think Arthur Smith is going to hone in on, and I think we could see a ton of targets for Kyle Pitts. So while people are down on him last week, look, I get it, but the Saints have always been good versus tight ends. And yes, Kyle Pitts is still a tight end. He's still got a 21% target share last week and 33% of the team's air yards. I really think this could be a big game.
Yeah, if you want to buy low on Kyle Pitts, if anybody's even interested in selling on him, now is definitely the time to do it. Erickson, what's your matchup here?
I'm looking at two key guys from the Rams, hoping for a bounce back, Cam Akers and Allen Robinson. And I don't think either of them are going to bounce back, to be totally honest. Darrell Henderson, 82% snap rate on Thursday night. He's the RB1 in this offense. And this offense doesn't split touches. They use one running back. And right now, that running back is Darrell Henderson. So he should be in all your lineups, because if he's going to see that type of usage, he's going to be a fringe fantasy RB1. And then Allen Robinson, 4% target rate per route run. Yeah, he's out there getting all the cardio reps in. That's great. But 4% target rate, lowest of his career. Talked about the perimeter corners. Why would Matthew Stafford go target the worst matchup on the outside when Cooper Kupp is always going to be open? So I'm out on Robinson and Akers this week.
Really quickly, if you had to pick one, who would you rather start?
If I had to start, I mean, Akers, at least I know Robinson's going to be on the field, so I'll go over A-Rob.
Game number 9, Seahawks at 49ers, NFC West clash. Debro, what's the key matchup?
Look, San Francisco's secondary is good. Their entire defense is good. Their pass rush is good. Their run defense is good. It's going to be a rough day. But if Seattle is going to sit here and have any success on offense, they're going to have to get the run game going. And like I said, it's going to be uphill sledding for them. Look, San Francisco's run defense was one to avoid last year. Still think the same things this year. 4th lowest explosive run rate last year. 2nd lowest yards per attempt. So Rashod Penny, Ken Walker, it's not looking great.
Erickson, how about you?
Looking at Brandon Aiyuk, who ran a route on 100% of the team's dropbacks in week 1. Wide receiver 1 usage. They're putting Debo in the backfield a little bit more. George Kittle is still dealing with his injury. So I think it's Aiyuk season. He had 47 yards on just 3 touches in week 1. This guy's explosive with the ball in his hands. And Seattle gave up massive chunk plays in week 1 to the Broncos wide receivers. 21 yards per reception. Aiyuk's going off.
Freeman, I know you're looking at some other 49ers skill position players.
Yeah, Erickson mentioned Debo, looking at him, and also Jeff Wilson. So starter Elijah Mitchell is out with a knee injury. Other than Mitchell, Wilson was the only running back to touch the ball or even play on offense last week, because 3rd-round running back Tyrion Davis-Price was inactive. Undrafted running back Jordan Mason was on special teams. Can he hold off those rookies? Because he got a great matchup as a home favorite against the Seattle defense that was number 3 in most fantasy points allowed to running backs last year. But there's also Deebo Samuel, who had 8 carries last week. Last year, he averaged 5 carries per game in the second half of the season. In the playoffs, 9 carries per game. With no Mitchell, how many carries does Debo get in this game? And then does that mean that he keeps Wilson, does he keep him from being able to hit his ceiling here? And then the matchup, of course, is great against Seattle with his carries and targets combined. Debo can have like 150 yards.
Do you think Debo got so many carries because of the monsoon that was happening during that game and they just didn't want to risk throwing the ball as much? Or do you think that's a sign of things to come this year?
I think it's like in line with what he did in the second half of the season and what he did in the playoffs. So it just feels like a continuation of what we've seen.
Game number 10, Bengals at Cowboys. Looks a little different with no Dak in play. Freeman, what's your key matchup?
All right, I'm looking at the Bengals defensive line against the Cowboys offensive line. This offense is bad. It's not just that Dak isn't there. It's not just the wide receiver situation. Amari Cooper gone, James Washington out, Jalen Tolbert on the bench, and Michael Gallup uncertain with his injury. It's not just the offensive scheme is starting to look stale. This offensive line is terrible. All right, left tackle Tyron Smith is on IR. Right tackle L. Collins and left guard Connor Williams are gone. Smith has been replaced by a rookie, and Collins and Williams have been replaced by last year's backups. And then now a new left guard, Connor McGovern, was injured in week 1. So left tackle Tyler Smith, he might have to shift back to guard, which means just recently signed offensive tackle Jason Peters, who is 40 years old. And again, just signed off the street. He might now start at left tackle. Like, this unit used to be the strength of the offense. But an offensive line, it requires continuity and stability, and it's had very little of that recently. And it's going against a Bengals defensive line with no weak link. Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard on the edge, DJ Reader and BJ Hill on the interior. All of those guys are above average veterans. This Cowboys offensive line, I think, is going to struggle, and it's going to struggle in run blocking. It's going to struggle in pass blocking. That will have ramifications for all of the skill position players for the Cowboys.
D-Bro, one of the few guys left standing is Dalton Schultz.
I think Dalton Schultz can still have a good game. We saw it last week. I mean, look, his target rate was 5th amongst all tight ends. He was a top 7 tight end for us in fantasy. First in snap share and route participation. The Bengals were terrible versus tight ends. So if we're looking at, okay, Cooper Rush has got to get the ball out fast, I think it's going to be a lot of PPR points for Dalton Schultz. Against a Bengals defense that was 24th in DVOA, they gave it the 4th most receptions and 5th most receiving yards to tight ends. And on the other side of the ball, I think it's another big Joe Mixon week. You look at his expected fantasy points from last week, it should have been a monster day if he just would have got into the end zone. But I think we're going to see that this week. Cowboys were terrible versus the run last year. We're looking at a run defense. I gave it the 10th highest yards per attempt last year, and they were 30th in red zone rushing defense. So, whether or not T. Higgins plays, I think Joe Mixon is going to be pivotal for how the Bengals are going to attack the Dallas Cowboys. I think we're looking at 25 plus touches for Joe Mixon. Let's go.
Erickson, you're eyeing a couple of top wide receivers.
Yeah, I'm looking at the wide receiver ones on each team. Jamar Chase against Trayvon Diggs. And I mean, Diggs is one of the more overrated cornerbacks in the NFL. Look, last year he allowed the most receiving yards in coverage. Jamar Chase averaged over 20 yards per catch last season. Like, Jamar Chase is going to have so many receiving yards in this game, especially if T. Higgins can't go. I don't think Diggs can hang with him. And the Dallas defense as a whole allowed over 14 yards per catch to wide receivers in week 1. And then when it comes to Ceedee Lamb didn't have a single catch from the outside in week 1. He's not winning on the outside on the perimeter, so that's putting him more into the slot. Bengals slot cornerback Mike Hilton allowed just 4 catches for 18 yards on 5 targets to Claypool in the slot in week 1. So I think it's going to be a very low ceiling game for Ceedee Lamb. People are going to be left disappointed, even if he does see a decent amount of volume.
We've got 5 games left here. Game number 11 on the slate is Texans at Browns. D-Bro, what's the key matchup?
If the Texans are going to have any shot in this game, and I'm not telling you they're going to win the game, but to move the ball, Brandin Cooks is going to have to excel versus these really talented Broncos cornerbacks. He's going to be the tip of the spear for Davis Mills. He saw above a 30% target share last week, above a 30% target per route run rate. He was 28th in PFF's receiving grade. Surtain and Ronald Darby are really good corners. I mean, Surtain allowed a 69 passer rating last year. We could see shadow coverage from him. I know he followed Metcalf on 23 of his 28 routes last week. So Brandin Cooks needs to excel. We're going to see it. Maybe not. I don't know.
Freeman, what's your key matchup here?
Looking at Dameon Pierce and Jerry Jeudy, with Pierce, we expected him to be the lead back entering week one. He was named the starter, but he played behind Burkhead for most of the game. I don't believe he played a snap of overtime, which is like an incredibly damning indictment. And then after the game, head coach Lovie Smith said it was something that just happened because of the flow of the game, whatever that means. Let's monitor his usage this week. And then Jerry Jeudy, he played in the slot, so he was the Tyler Lockett function for new quarterback Russell Wilson. 89% snap rate, 7 targets, 102 yards, and a touchdown. He scored the touchdown, by the way. If I might be so bold, it looks like Jeudy, not Sutton, is the number one receiver so far. Let's see if that holds for week 2. Maybe, who knows, maybe this week. This is the week that Courtland Sutton scores 1, 2, maybe even 3 touchdowns.
I was waiting for it. Knew it was coming.
I had a tweet early on in that Monday night game about how basically neither the Sutton truthers or the Jeudy truthers were correct. It was obviously a joke. It was still the first half of the first game of the season. And then within 5 minutes of tweeting that, we saw Jerry Jeudy get the long touchdown, and I got tagged on the Fantasy Pros account by Old Takes Exposed maybe 100 times in the span of a few minutes. Erickson, you probably also should have gotten tagged by Old Takes Exposed after your Sutton call going into week 1.
Yeah, I blocked them a long time ago. So Courtland Sutton. So we talked about the targets. They had the same amount of targets. Sutton and Jeudy both had 7 targets on Monday Night Football. But, touchdowns are a nice descriptive stat, but are they predictive week over week? I would say no. I'm actually going to lean towards the air yard share that Courtland Sutton commanded the lion's share of, 44%, 121 air yards, running a route on a team high, 98% of dropbacks. So Michael Pittman went off against this Texans defense, over 120 receiving yards. I think Pittman fits the mold similar to Courtland Sutton, alpha on the outside. So yeah, you're going to get your touchdown here in week 2, Friedman.
Preach, Erickson. Preach.
Erickson, how nervous were you early in that Monday night game with all the throws going to Andrew Beck instead of Sutton?
I mean, yeah, that was definitely not highlighted by Monday night.
Last game on the late afternoon slate is Cardinals at Raiders. Friedman, what is the key matchup?
I'm going to be super chalky and say it is Kyler Murray against this Raiders coverage unit. Say what you want about Murray and his perennial second half fall off. In real life, he is a top 10 NFL quarterback, especially early in the year before he's accumulated all of the hits that come with the NFL season. We need to see that translate into fantasy production this week. He's without perimeter wide receivers DeAndre Hopkins, Antoine Wesley. Maybe he'll be without Rondale Moore this week, but the Raiders also have issues. In week number 1, they allowed Justin Herbert to go off with the 76.5% completion rate, 10 adjusted yards per attempt. They were number 30 in dropback EPA per play, and they weren't great last year in pass defense. They were number 26 in dropback EPA per play. So part of the challenge for the Raiders is that they've experienced a lot of turnover this offseason at cornerback, and so they don't have a lot of cohesion on the back end unit. Last year, their top perimeter corners were Casey Hayward, Trayvon Mullen, Brandon Fashion, and Desmond Trufant. All of those guys are gone. All right. They've been replaced by Rocky Sin and Anthony Averett. And Averett, he's already out with an injury, which means that last year's number 5 perimeter corner is now starting for the team. Like, that is bad. And they have Nate Hobbs in the slot. He's returning, but he's a 2021 fifth rounder who's allowed an 81.4% completion rate for his career. And then at safety, the Raiders have I think, pretty mediocre duo of Jonathan Abram and Trevon Moehrig. Moehrig didn't practice Wednesday or Thursday because of hip injury. And then Denzel Perryman, the team's main off-ball coverage linebacker, he also missed practice on Wednesday and Thursday because of an ankle injury. So it's a really it's a beat up new unit back there with a lot of different pieces, and they're adjusting to a new scheme under defensive coordinator Patrick Graham. So you put all that together, and in our Fantasy Pros unit power rankings, Murray has a significant edge over the Raiders defense in general, and this secondary in particular. I think he gets back on track this week and has a pretty typical Kyler Murray type of performance.
Friedman is looking at the passing game from Arizona. Erickson is looking at the running game.
I think that with James Conner, I think the Raiders have a kind of an underrated run defense. You look at what they did last year. They limited, in week 1, they limited Austin Eckler to the second lowest rushing EPA among all running backs. And per PFS O-line D-line matchup chart, Cardinals are the biggest disadvantage when they elect to run the football with James Conner. Now, the Arizona Cardinals they have a bottom 5 offensive line. So the fact that the Raiders secondary is so bad and that the strengths of the defense are on the front, I think that you're just going to see more passing from this Cardinals offense, and you're going to see an inefficient rushing attack from James Conner.
Debro looking at the Vegas side of things.
Well, if Kyler Murray goes ham this week, because I don't think it's a double XP week for Call of Duty, so he probably does have a good game. If he has a good game, outside of Devontae Adams doing Devontae Adams things, I think Hunter Renfrow and Josh Jacobs are in for big games here. Renfrow is going to run 92% of his routes, or close to that, against Jalen Thompson in the slot, who allowed an 87% catch rate, 123 passer rating last year. My bold call on the site is that I think Hunter Renfrow could be a top 15, top 12 wide receiver this week. And with Josh Jacobs, everybody's out on him. And look, I'm not telling you that I was drafting him, but draft season is over, and I will be starting him and ranking him aggressively this week versus a Cardinals run defense that was terrible last year. And CEH looked great in week 1 against them. 31st in explosive run rate last year allowed. Jacobs had the highest PFF elusive rating after week 1. I think he can crush, and it doesn't matter if the Raiders' offensive line is not good. The Cardinals' defensive line sucks too.
Let's move to the primetime games. Bears at Packers. Friedman, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I'm going to be real original and say I'm looking at Aaron Rodgers against this Bears secondary. The Packers scored only 7 points in week 1. Rodgers looked horrible, 22 of 34 passing for only 195 yards with an interception, but they were without left tackle David Bakhtiari, right tackle Elgton Jenkins, and number 1 wide receiver Allen Lazard. Jenkins and Lazard both practice on Wednesday and Thursday. I think they probably return this week. That makes a pretty big difference. And the Packers suffered an embarrassing 38-3 road loss to the Saints last year, and then they went 13-3 the rest of the way. Aaron Rodgers was awesome, winning the second MVP. I think they start to get back on track this week. And, Packers at Lambeau Field. Plus, he owns the Bears. He's owned them his entire life. He still owns them. I don't think there's a question as to whether Rodgers bounces back in this game. Like, the question is, how big of a bounce back is it? The Bears, they had a great weather-aided 19-10 victory last week as home underdogs, but that was against Trey Lance, not Aaron Rodgers, and it was in the pouring rain. In our Fantasy Pros unit power rankings, Rodgers has a clear edge over the Bears defense in general, and the secondary in particular, both of which are bottom 4 units. And the Bears specifically have 2 rookies starting in their secondary. Slot cornerback Kyler Gordon and strong safety Jaquan Brisker. I think Rodgers is going to attack those 2 players in specifically. He's going to have Lazard matched up against Gordon, and he's going to have Robert Tonyan matched up against Brisker. Those are maybe his 2 most trusted pass catchers. I think it is a typical Aaron Rodgers performance in week 2.
Erickson, once again, Friedman is looking at the passing game, and you are looking at the running game.
Yeah, I'm looking at the 2 running backs for the Packers, A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. Before Elijah Mitchell got hurt, he was averaging 6.8 yards per carry against the Chicago Bears defense. So call me crazy. I'm not afraid of this defense for the rushing game. They should be playing with a lead as 10-point home favorites. I think A.J. Dillon's going to eat in the beginning or at the end of the game, kind of clean things up, whereas Aaron Jones gets the receptions that we were hoping he was going to get in week 1. LaFleur has already come out and said 8 touches is not enough for Aaron Jones. Jones' last 2 games against the Bears, 19.5 fantasy points per game. I think that we're going to see his 2 best players on offense get fed a lot as part of this Aaron Rodgers bounce back game.
Debro, what are you looking at in the Sunday Night Football matchup?
I think if the Bears are going to move the ball, they need to be doing it with David Montgomery. I was surprised he had the 5th highest opportunity share last week. And the big thing for Montgomery is I thought he was going to lose the passing work, but that didn't happen. 2nd highest route participation mark in week 1 last year versus Green Bay. He had a fantastic game. He was the RB 16 touches, 81 total yards. I think that he's a solid RB2 this week. And I think if Chicago wants to move the ball, they need to be feeding David Montgomery. And on the other side, I get Freeman, we're going with Alvin Lazard and Robert Tonyan and stuff. I think one of these rookies needs to step forward, and Aaron Rodgers needs to pull his head out of his butt and target them this week. Stop targeting Sammy Watkins and Randall Cobb. They're dust. Their golden age is past. You need to be targeting Romeo Doubs or Christian Watson, especially looking at Jalen Johnson and Kendall Vildor on the outside. They gave up a combined 11 receiving touchdowns last year. And just for everybody listening at home, it's not good. I think one of these rookies can burn them deep this week.
For some reason, we have a doubleheader on Monday Night Football in Week 2 instead of Week 1 this year, so we have 2 games left. First one of those is Titans at Bills. Erickson, what's the key matchup?
I'm looking at the Bills running back room against this Titans run defense that got absolutely annihilated by Saquon Barkley in Week 1. They give up the most rushing yards to any running back in that particular week. So I think it's going to be the Devin Singletary show. I think the Bills showed that they wanted to use more of the running backs in Week 1, except in this particular matchup, they're going to put all their eggs in the Devin Singletary basket because both James Cook and Zach Moss fumbled in Week 1. James Cook barely ever saw the field after he fumbled, and Zach Moss looked horrible on the touches he was getting as a receiver and as a rusher. So even though Singletary only had 10 touches, I expect that number to increase a lot in this matchup because if you look at last year, Singletary, he fumbled the ball early in the season, and then he was in the doghouse for the majority of the first half of the year. And then they trusted him again later down the line, never fumbled again. So I think this Bills coaching staff is really aware of ball security because that's how they're going to lose the game. These players making mistakes like Isaiah McKenzie, like a James Cook. Singletary, they trust, and I think they're going to trust him in this matchup that he can exploit.
D-Bro, what's your matchup you're looking at?
Titans have got a rough go of it. We know that the Bills secondary is extremely good. If they're going to have a chance to move the ball, Derrick Henry has got to have a big game, and the matchup is terrible for him. I mean, after 1 week, the Bills are first and sixth in adjusted line yards and second level yards, allowing the second lowest rushing success rate. He's going to get a lot of volume, but really, the Tennessee Titans need Derrick Henry to step up. And on the Bills side, look, if Christian Fulton possibly shadows Stephon Diggs, it probably doesn't happen because they play a lot of zone coverage, but he could. We saw it happen once last year with Fulton following a wide receiver. Gabe Davis needs to step up with another fantastic performance. And for all the haters out there, I get he got a 16% target share last week. He also saw 37% of the team's air yards. He was the 31st highest graded wide receiver per PFF with 2.67 yards per route run. If the Bills do not get another massive game out of Steph Diggs, it needs to come from Gabe Davis.
Freeman, what are you looking from the Tennessee offense?
Yeah, looking at Ryan Tannehill and Treylon Burks, the Bills were number 1 in pass DVOA last year, and then in Week 1 on Thursday Night Football, shut down the Rams, and now they have 4 extra days to prepare for the game. So this is a downgrade spot for Tannehill, and the Titans are in real danger of starting 0-2 as 10-point road dogs after losing to the Giants last week. And if the Titans lose and Tannehill is mediocre, at some point he's going to get benched this year for Malik Willis. Not to say like this is a must-win game for Tannehill, but it kind of is. And we got Treylon Burks, who played just 37% of the snaps last week, just 14 routes, but he saw 5 targets and 55 yards. That part is super encouraging. So will he get more snaps and routes this week? And will he be targeted at the same rate? If Tannehill somehow has a big game, I think that Burks is going to be the reason why.
Saving maybe the best for last, Vikings at Eagles. Looks like one of the most fun matchups on the entire slate. D-Bro, what's the key matchup?
I think it's going to be Dalvin Cook Day versus the Philly run defense. This is not the same Philly run defense we've seen in previous iterations. After for Week 1, 3rd highest rush EPA allowed, 6th highest rushing success rate. Dalvin Cook didn't play all the snaps, rolling in with 72% last week, but I think this is a great spot to get him going, get him in the end zone, 25-plus touches, and especially through the passing game, I think he can have a huge day. He had 16.7% target share last week, and the Eagles struggled versus receiving back. So sign me up, Dalvin Cook Day.
Freeman, what are you looking at?
Some more low-hanging fruit, boys. A.J. Brown and Justin Jefferson. Ever heard of them? A.J. Brown, we have the bold predictions article every week. Mine this week is that A.J. Brown will have another 150-yard performance. Last week, 155 yards and a league-high 73% share of air yards on 13 targets. This week, he gets to face a 32-year-old number 1 cornerback, Patrick Peterson, who last week allowed Christian Watson, a raw, small school rookie receiver, on his first ever NFL snap to burn him deep for what should have been a wide open 75-yard touchdown if he hadn't dropped the ball. This week, A.J. Brown will not drop that ball. And then Justin Jefferson, he was great last week, but the Packers also used a lot of soft zone defense for whatever reason. I think the Eagles are going to be more aggressive with cornerbacks James Bradbury and Darius Slay. I'm not doubting Jefferson, who was great. We saw him ball out in a new offense against one look last week. This week, he probably gets a different type of look. Let's see him do it again.
Erickson, at the end of the last show, you guaranteed 3 touchdowns from Courtland Sutton. Now that Miles Sanders has broken the seal and finally gotten in the end zone again, are you going to be bold enough to predict 3 more from him?
It's just going to be raining Miles Sanders touchdowns because he got 3 goal line carries in week 1. He had 6 all of last season. So Miles Sanders has some touchdown equity in this Philadelphia Eagles offense, and he's healthy right now, and I think the Vikings can be run on. When the Packers ran the football last week, 6.2 yards per carry, and the Vikings ranked 7th worst in EPA versus the rush. So I think the Eagles can take advantage of the matchup on the ground when they don't elect to throw the ball to A.J. Brown. And the fact that Sanders got some goal line work, even though the other guys also got some work too, I think he can at least get one.
Guys, let's open up the mailbag here to end the show. It's a good time to remind the listeners that if they want even more access to our analysts, be sure to join us on Discord at fantasypros.com/chat. A premium subscription will get listeners full access to our analysts through AMAs, stages, and more. Our question this week: how worried should I be as a Najee owner? If trading Harris away, what are some of the best buy low top 10 running backs to target? Friedman, who would you be targeting as a buy low?
Within the top 10, honestly, I don't like anyone as a really good buy low candidate within the top 10. I think a lot of them are fairly obvious at this point. And the guys who I'd say like Austin Eckler, like I'm actually concerned about him as like a buy low candidate. Like I don't know if I would want to buy him low because of the worries that he has within that backfield of not getting the usage. So I can see wanting to trade Najee, but I don't think there's a really good candidate within the top 10 to trade him for.
Erickson, does anybody stand out to you?
I mean, I think that I'd almost prefer like looking for a wide receiver instead of, trying to find another running back. I mean, Nick Chubb, people just don't like to appreciate because he doesn't have this great role in the offense. He doesn't get all the touches, but he just finds a way to run for 100 yards every single week. Doesn't even matter with Kareem Hunt scoring all the touchdowns. Or Antonio Gibson would be someone I would look at. People are down on Gibson because Brian Robinson is going to be coming back, even though he has a bullet in his butt and it's like it's going to maybe cause some issues. I mean, Gibson, who's to say he's not going to lose this starting role that he has? So, I mean, if you're trying to get out of Najee, I think Gibson is someone that you can look at as a potential escape route.
D-Bro, quickly, how about you?
James Conner, I think, sticks out. I think last week the blowout for the Cardinals is covering up the fact that he played 96% of the snaps before they started getting blown out. If he runs all the routes, plays all the snaps, and has a rough game this week, he's a good buy low.
Let's wrap it up there, fellas. Thank you all for another awesome episode. Everybody listening, please remember to check out the autopilot tool this season, and of course all the other tools Fantasy Pros has to offer at My Playbook. Thank you, the fans, for listening. For Friedman and Erickson and D-Bro, I'm Ryan Wormley. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.